Breitbart News Sunday is pleased to welcome Representative Thomas Massie, who represents the 4th Congressional District of Kentucky and has done so since 2012. Congressman, welcome to Breitbart News Sunday.
Oh, it's wonderful to be on your show.
All right, talk to us about the economic reopening and what it looks like in Kentucky right now, how people feel about the enduring state of this coronavirus fight and whether people are anxious to make sure that there's absolutely no risk or whether people are more anxious to open up and get back to work.
Well, I think the people are split in terms of support for the shutdown or opening the government back up. But I am all for opening it back up, and I'll tell you why. I'm worried about our food supply. You can send money to states, you can send money to farmers, but until people go back to work, it's going to be hard to get the food from the farms to the grocery stores. And I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the mental health of the folks in Kentucky. Kentucky's been shut down almost as much as New York City has been shut down. I think our governor, he's a Democrat, has just been copying off of other states and, frankly, putting things in place that aren't appropriate for Kentucky. In fact, he sent the state police to the churches on Easter to go photograph the license plates and take down license plates numbers, while at the same time he's letting felons out of jail. So we're having a hard time figuring out, I am at least, his strategy here in Kentucky.
Now, it's interesting. You mentioned the governor. This is Governor Andrew Beshear, who has been somewhat controversial because he's vetoed things that the state legislature has put through. The latest, of course, being a bill to restrict abortion services. Tell us a little bit about this. I know you're in Congress in Washington, D.C., and this is not necessarily an issue you're involved with directly, but I'm sure you have a take on it. What Beshear is doing in terms of vetoing this latest bill. Tell us about the bill and what his decision was and how people are reacting to it.
Well, it's out of step with Kentucky's values, frankly. It's interesting how we came to get a Democrat governor in Kentucky. Governor Matt Bevin was doing a great job, but he told the teachers union something they didn't want to hear. He was trying to fix their pension. His messaging may have been a little bit off, and ultimately trying to do the right thing cost him the election. So we ended up with a Democrat who is not pro-gun, not pro-life. And so it's not really a surprise that, to me anyway, that Andy Beshear would veto this legislation. Now, the disappointing thing is he did it. The Kentucky legislature is out of session, so they can't override his veto, and that's the really disappointing thing.
Wow.
In this case, but he comes on the TV every night, and he's kind of got a little bit of a cult following. Even some of the Republicans like him, and I have a real problem with the policies that he's put in place, and for instance, the way he's gone after people who are trying to go to church and worship.
Yeah, it's interesting. The tendency among Republicans is to rally behind people who are in charge during a time of crisis, whereas at the national level, we've seen Democrats do exactly the opposite to President Trump. But just to come back to this bill, this was passed by the Republican House, Republican Senate in Kentucky, stating that a physician performing an abortion shall take all medically appropriate and reasonable steps to preserve the life and health of a born alive infant. So I suppose that's an infant who was supposed to be aborted but who survives. That requires the doctor, or the bill would have required the doctor to take care of the child, and this has now been vetoed by the governor. It seems an unusual one to veto, especially in a traditionally conservative state like Kentucky.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a controversial bill at all. I mean, you might think in New York or some more liberal state that they wouldn't try to save a child that was born alive, but in Kentucky, it's really out of step. I mean, it's not an extreme pro-life thing to say, hey, if the baby is born alive, we're going to save the baby. But that's where we are here in Kentucky with this governor, very disappointed in his veto. And maybe, with the supermajority, maybe they can come back and pass it again in time to override any veto that he does.
All right, let's talk again about the economy, coming back to Kentucky.
Yeah.
And there's concern, you mentioned the food supply chain and
Yeah.
particularly meat. We have a lot of meat producers, pork producers in particular in Kentucky, very important source of protein for many Americans. And there are some threats at the moment, some concerns that there might be meat shortages as
Yes.
you have coronavirus spreading to suppliers, not just in this country where we've seen it at a few processing facilities, but you're starting to see in foreign countries from which we import chicken, beef, pork, you're starting to see coronavirus interfere with some of the supply chains. Tell us a little bit about that problem.
Yeah, sure. And people are having a hard time understanding why there are going to be shortages, but I'll tell you why there will be shortages. Now, right now there aren't shortages because there was a supply of meat that was destined for restaurants, and the demand at the restaurants was curtailed when they were shut down. And it's frozen meat, and they're repackaging it and diverting that supply to the grocery stores. But here's the thing, Joel. That supply is going to run out, and the pipeline has a crimp in it, and that's at the processing plants. A significant fraction of our country's processing plants have shut down due to COVID. And the farmers, here's what I'm afraid you're going to see. Now, I raise beef cattle, by the way. I have 60 of them back at my house. And so I understand this. And right now, the cattle prices haven't gone down because there's grass. We're here in the summer, and the grass is coming on. But like with pork, new pigs are born, and you have to sell the hogs that you fed out. Otherwise, there's no place to put the new pigs that are born. And what's happening is that, with the significant fraction of the ability to process that pork shut down, what you're going to see here pretty soon is farmers euthanizing animals, and while at the same time you may have shortages in the supermarket. Now, that happens quicker with hogs. That problem comes on as quicker with hogs because they have shorter lifespans. But with cattle, I think you could see the same emergency happening by this fall. You could, and it would be really devastating to have shortages in the supermarket. Meanwhile, you might have farmers who have to euthanize animals because they don't have the space or the feed. Some people think, well, just keep feeding the animals. Well, you run out of space and you run out of feed eventually if you don't turn them into food. And that's something that I've been shouting from the rooftops and trying to get some attention for. And I've got a bill in Congress called the Prime Act. It's got Republican and Democrat sponsors. It's in the House and the Senate. It would let local meat processors, the ones that process meat like for farmers, if the farmers want to consume their own cattle, or if a family wants to buy a whole animal, they can use one of these processors. But today, those processors can't sell into grocery stores because even though they're inspected, they don't have an inspector on staff all the time, and so the USDA won't let them sell into grocery stores. I'm saying let those small processors, those small meat processors, let them fill in the gaps so that we don't have the dangerous situation where we're euthanizing animals instead of providing them as food. And my bill would allow that to happen.
Okay, very interesting. So speaking of legislation, you were one of the 5 members of Congress who voted against the extension to the Paycheck Protection Program, which obviously included a lot of other stuff as well by the time it finally passed the House. But it was just interesting to see you were one who voted against it. There were 3 other members of the Freedom Caucus who voted against it. And then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez voted against it. And she's one of the most left-wing members of Congress. So it was just an unusual grouping. And I was wondering if you could explain that. Tell us about your vote, and are you friends with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez now, or is this just sort of coincidence that this happened at the same time?
No, we voted against the bill for different reasons. The reason that I voted against it, there's several reasons. One, a lot of this money is going to companies that don't need it. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program, but it's going to the small companies, or supposed to go to small companies. We know from their public filings that it's gone to some publicly traded companies that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars that don't need the money, and that's a problem. Senator Ron Johnson had a good idea. He said, well, how about if you made more money in 2020 than you made in 2019, you shouldn't be able to get the loan forgiven if you take these loans, because there's no checks and balances on this money that's going out. That's why we ran out before. But here's the real problem with it. By sending money into the states and into the companies and into the hands of everybody, we are basically covering up for the killing of the economy that's been done by the governors. You know, the president and I would like to see these governors open their economies back up, but and there's some discussion about who has the power to control that. But if we keep paying for the shutdown, the governors are going to keep it shut down. It's almost like we're doing a blood transfusion for the economy, but we haven't stopped the bleeding. And so we're going to be back in Congress doing another $500 billion bill. I can assure you they're going to ask us to do this in probably 4 weeks when this money runs out, because it's eventually just going to keep running out. It's like I said, it's like giving a blood transfusion to a patient that has their arteries cut. We need to deal with the bleeding.
It's very interesting. You know, sometimes these stances by a minority of members of Congress are controversial at the time, but later they often seem prophetic. I'll give you a recent example. Maybe you could comment on it as well. But in the Senate, in the CARES Act, there were 4 Republican senators who opposed the final version of the bill. They were in favor of the idea, but they were opposed to the final version because it had such generous unemployment insurance benefits that some workers, they said, would prefer to stay unemployed than to look for work. And everybody attacked them. The media attacked them. Some Republicans attacked them and said, you guys are messing things up here. Media attacked them, said, you guys are greedy. You don't like it when people get unemployment benefits. The Democrats said, oh, these greedy Republicans don't want you to get any money on unemployment if you lose your job. Well, a month later, there are huge problems in the labor market because employers who are hiring can't find people to fill the jobs because unemployment pays more than work. And I wonder if you're right. I mean, there's some logic in what you're saying.
Yeah, they were absolutely right. I have employers, small companies in my district. They were asking me at the time when the bill passed, they said, what are you guys doing up there? I won't be able to get anybody to come to work if you do that. And, of course, they were right. Now those small businesses are sending me copies of the texts where they text their employees, hey, so-and-so, we'd really like you to come back to work. And then so-and-so responds, well, you know, I'd like to, but I can't afford to. I need this extra money that I'm getting from the government to not work. And so people are staying home instead of coming back to work. And this is happening in every county, in every state in the union. I can guarantee it. Everybody is seeing this happen, every small business. So that's the other problem, Joel, with this fourth coronavirus bill. It's the second tranche of money that went to the Paycheck Protection Program, is we've got our foot on the brake and our foot on the gas at the same time. And you can't, that's going to hurt that is hurting the small companies as well, the labor supply.
All right. Now, I've got to ask you about this confrontation with the president. I imagine you are generally very supportive of the president, but you had a difficult confrontation with him over the CARES Act, and he tweeted, I'm just reading from March 27th, he says, by empowering the radical left Democrats, do-nothing Kentucky politician Representative Thomas Massie is making their war on the Second Amendment more and more difficult to win. But don't worry, we will win anyway. He is a disaster for America and for the great state of Kentucky. I can't imagine that felt nice, but how did you react to that, and what do you have to say about it a month later?
Well, he went on to call me a third-rate grandstander in another tweet, and I maintain I'm at least the second-rate, not third-rate. I mean, you wouldn't have me on your show if I was third-rate. I believe you got a cutoff. But the other thing is, I am chairman of the Second Amendment caucus in Congress. Okay, I am to the right of the NRA. So I don't know what he's talking about on the Second Amendment there. I think he was just really upset because he didn't understand what I was trying to do. This is another one of those things where it hurts to, it's not a popular thing, and it can hurt you politically to be out in front and be on the right side of things. But on March 27th, I didn't delay the bill. I didn't stop the bill. I told everybody what I was doing, and they got mad at me. What I said was, we've got truckers that are driving, we've got nurses that are putting their lives on the line, we've got grocery store workers that are working, and Congress is getting $174,000 a year each. They've got good health care. By golly, they're supposed to be leading, not hiding at home eating ice cream. Come to work and vote on this bill. That's all I asked for on March 27th. Now, I think the president thought that I would endanger the passage of the bill, and that's why he got upset. But, I still support the president. And, in fact, I've called the White House and said, hey, I've got no hard feelings. I understand the tweets were, in the heat of the moment, and I want to help the president. But, Joel, look at what happened in Congress this week. They showed up. They all showed up, and they all voted instead of letting Nancy Pelosi pass it by unanimous consent. And there were only 5 of us who voted against it. But at least history will show that there was a vote. And constitutionally, you have to have a quorum voting on a piece of legislation that's half of Congress, or it's not even valid legislation.
Now, has this affected re-election at all? And we know that Republicans are facing a tough fight. Look, Democrats are facing a tough fight also. It's all up in the air right now. No one knows where this is going to go. But tell us about your re-election campaign. Has it been affected by this at all, by the controversy over that vote, or by coronavirus in general, the economic situation? How is re-election looking for November?
Well, whoever wins the primary here in Kentucky, 4th District, is going to win in November. I beat the Democrat by 42 points in the last cycle.
Right.
And the president won by 36 points in the last cycle, and he's very popular. I'm not going to gloss over that. His approval rating here in the 4th District is like 94% among Republicans. So it has hurt me. The tweets hurt me. There's no doubt about that. But the day I took that stand on March 27th, I received $73,000 online. Eventually, I got 4,000 donations, and 87% of the donations were $100 or less. Just an outpouring of people that supported what I was doing on March 27th. So it's sort of a wash. People know that I was the only one who would stand up on March 27th, but also the tweets against me didn't help at all.
No, I'm sure they didn't. But look, it's an environment where anything can happen, and the way that we've seen this administration operate, you can be an opponent one day and a friend the next. Just depends on what's happening. Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky's 4th District, I want to give a shout out also to my relatives, actually my wife's relatives who live in Union, which is in your district, Robin Russell and her family, if they're listening.
It's an honor to represent them. Union smack dab in the middle of my congressional district.
Beautiful part of the country. I haven't been there often enough. I have been there once or twice, especially when I spent summers in southern Ohio with my cousins there. And this is from a different side of the family, but beautiful part of the world, and hope to visit you there one day soon. Congressman Thomas Massie, thanks so much for joining us on Breitbart News Sunday.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.